Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dadsplaining Politics. Today we're together, I'm back home, so we won't have as many network difficulties as we sometimes have. Nice to see you, Mr. Mark Phipps. How are you doing?
Hi, Freddie. Good, thank you. How are you?
Great, I'm doing great. I think we're both doing particularly well because obviously, as I'm sure a lot of you have heard, around 2 hours ago, our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese declared that in September at the UN General Assembly meeting, he would recognize the state of Palestine. So obviously, there's a lot of different factors associated with that. It doesn't mean that the Australian government is completely behind Palestine or anything of the sort, but we'll get into that first, I think, talking about Palestinian statehood. And then we're going to talk about the conference with Putin and Trump coming up really soon. Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Yes. Finally, the Australian government has made the announcement about recognising the state of Palestine, following on from France and the UK, particularly large countries, and Canada as well. And so, in a sense, it's good that they finally got to this conclusion. Netanyahu overnight, they obviously informed the Israelis of this on Sunday, and Netanyahu overnight said it's shameful, and if this had happened next to Sydney or Melbourne, Australians would be doing exactly what Israel's done and not in as targeted a way, but certainly not using diplomatic language and sort of lashing out somewhat is the response there. And I suppose the interesting thing will be the opposition's response to this in Australia. And of course, the argument people use is that, Hamas is still in power. And of course, a Palestinian state with any semblance of Hamas still around is not going to work, right? So that's the complexity of this that needs to be worked out. Both agree that symbolically the Australian government had to say this.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, naturally. I think one of the other elements of it that Albo is very focused on is the role of Palestine in assuming this statehood itself and who was going to lead this state, right? And I think that's what Macron and the rest of the leaders and Keir Starmer, etc., have also echoed that they really want there to be an effective government in charge before they recognize the state itself. And I know it came as quite a surprise to some people that Albo got on the phone with Mahmoud Abbas, who is the president of the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian Liberation.
No, it's called the Palestinian Authority now.
Yeah. But yeah, which is I did a little deep dive into history, if you guys will stick with me and listen to where this came about from. So obviously, since Zionist Jews started buying up land and coming back to Israel and retaining a presence there started conflict between the two forces, etc. It came to the point where the US intervened a lot, and Palestine was able to come up with this Palestinian Authority. It had a government that governed fairly successfully, but Mahmoud Abbas, who is the current president, he retained power for far too long. He kept putting off elections when he was supposed to go to election because he was unsure he'd get voted in again. So, it became quite undemocratic at that point. And then there was a very crucial election in which Hamas won most of the legislative seats in the Gaza Strip, not throughout all of the Palestinian territories, so not in the West Bank, but won most of them in the Gaza Strip. So they basically decided that they were independent to the West Bank. Mahmoud Abbas, as the leader, often neglected the Gaza Strip going forward. I think he even imposed sanctions on the Gaza Strip, even as another Palestinian territory, because of the Hamas-led government there, because they used to have a relationship between their two parties, but then slowly it soured over time. And now he is in this position where he has near to no power, right? But I guess he's the one figurehead that the West can look to and ask, could he be the leader after Hamas is gone or eradicated, you could say. So there's a lot of important elements to this. It seems like an impossible situation. And yeah, that's really where it's standing. I don't know if you've seen what Susan Ley had to say in response.
I didn't see that yet.
No, I just saw that she has said things like she has recognized that there are starving children in Gaza, and I think that's more of a recognition than we would have gotten from any previous Liberal Party leader for a while. So yeah.
No, that will be interesting, that whole thing. And the move forward for Palestine as well will also be interesting. What role the Arab League plays in this, and whether it's some sort of UN body or an Arab League defense scenario working with the Palestinian Authority to, rebuild the place and all of that. But this is again all academic when Israel is talking about taking over Gaza City at the moment. And so the real question is, will all this pressure on Israel change their behavior or not? My sense is, whilst the US supports Israel, it won't really change their behavior, is my sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it was interesting looking into the history of all this as well, is the fact that the Palestinian Authority actually had quite good negotiations and conversations with the leader before Netanyahu, his predecessor, and as soon as Netanyahu got into government, those conversations were basically taken off the table. So it really shows a large shift in the Israeli government and politics in general towards completely denying statehood and any Palestinian existence as a whole. I think we've also seen recently, obviously, the critical announcement from the War Cabinet saying that they're planning to take over all of Gaza. I know some Gazans had in response, what more are they trying to do? They already have military encamped all over the Gaza Strip. What more can they do? And that's the question, right? What more can they do to the around 1 million people who still remain in the Gaza Strip with no way to escape and no way to evacuate the space? And as this has happened, there has been a massive increase in settler violence in the West Bank as well, which is going unmonitored by the media because everyone's so focused on Gaza. So the West Bank now has Israeli settlers, contributing attacks 4 times a day on average towards the Palestinians who live there. So we'll see how that develops as well. And, it's becoming a really difficult conflict in those two focal points, not just in Gaza anymore.
There was a huge protest in Israel against the government as well, just over the weekend. And so, again, it's fascinating how much of this strategy is based on Netanyahu wanting to stay in power, similar to Russia and Ukraine in Putin and such, versus what's right for Israel long term, because my view is the brand Israel has been seriously damaged around this, and as you would expect it to be when there's just these atrocities occurring, and there seems to be a denial of them from a communications point of view, which just is nonsensical.
Yeah, completely nonsensical. And I know that you've always had quite a great deal of respect for Israeli society, but I have seen some things recently where you see the conditions and the educational conditions of living within Israel, and you see the level of hatred. I don't know if other people have also seen this, just being spread on social media, stuff that you wouldn't have seen before. But the level of hatred from such incredibly young children, like 6 years old, and they will see a Palestinian person, they will say, die, die, I want to kill you, I want to kill you, you deserve to die. And I don't know, it's quite a fascinating look into how propaganda can really influence people's perspectives and, grow all this hate in such a turbulent country, right?
But I also think you can't put yourself in a scenario where you live in a country which is surrounded by enemies, and the October 7th attack, has severe implications on people's mental health and people's behavior, etc. So it's difficult for us to put ourselves in that position because we haven't lived under that sort of constant siege for forever. And
Oh,
I
thought you were going down a little argument that you were saying you can't put yourself in other people's territories. I thought you meant that Israel couldn't have put themselves in that space and they shouldn't have made a state there. And I was quite shocked, to be honest, because that would be quite revolutionary for you. But yeah, no, obviously there's lots happening with that. And it's just heartbreaking to keep watching, and the world will remember this forever. And I guess we like to think that that protest that happened last week that you were lucky to be at had some sort of impact on Albanese, and that's why he came out and said that he would recognize Palestine. So I think we can attribute it a bit to that, and attribute it to the fact that a large majority of the Labour government is in support of recognising Palestine, and a lot of them marched at the protest. I mean, Ed Husic obviously was at the front, and we had a number of other like really prominent Labour MPs.
I think it's an overall global reflection about how people's attitudes towards Israel versus Palestine have changed in this whole 6 or 12 months. And understandably, this is the damage I think that's been done to brand Israel. And I think it's going to take many, many years to recover it. And it will be fascinating what the long-term implications of this are.
Yeah, definitely. And also, we just hope that everything works out. I know that's kind of a naive way to look at it, but that's what we're hoping.
But even still, the other night we saw on the news people trying to fish, and the Israelis are stopping them fishing. They've destroyed the fishing boats and stuff like this so that they can, catch some food. It just seems insanely mean, and
it's not just mean, it's just like they're trying
just inhuman.
Well, they're just trying to starve them, obviously.
Yeah, it was just an example of that behavior. So,
well, what I find interesting as well is just like it's going to be a real reflection on the mainstream media at the end of all this, right? Because Al Jazeera has been reporting on that for like years. I've seen videos of that, of Palestinians getting killed for going out in their fishing boats for years. And now they're not even allowed to go out 100 meters. I don't think they're even allowed to get in the water. Before they weren't allowed to really fish commercially, but now they're not even allowed to leave the shore. So you see how this stuff just escalates.
Absolutely. Shall we segue to the summit between Putin and Trump, which is going to be happening on Friday of this week? And that is going to be happening in Alaska, which is not too far from Putin to go. It's only 70 kilometers between the end of Russia and Alaska, so not far for him to travel. And I think because he's wanted by the International Criminal Court, the US doesn't recognize their authorities, so the US is a safe country for Putin to go to.
Yeah, definitely. It is a remarkable difference as well in Trump's behavior towards Putin so far, right? He was giving him deadlines. He was calling him ridiculous. He was basically saying that the war had gone too far, really pushing against everything that Putin's been doing in Ukraine. And then suddenly there's been a massive switcheroo. And I wonder what prompted that. I would love to be a fly on the wall of some of the conversations that they've had together, because this is also a massive difference just in general of how the Western world has treated Putin and the Russian state in a long time, ever since they invaded Ukraine in 2012. And obviously the state was partitioned, etc., etc. The West has basically stopped Russia from coming to a lot of conferences, from engaging in diplomatic talks, etc., aside from ones about the war. So this is a big shift.
I hope JD Vance has been in Europe, staying in the Cotswolds of all places with his family over summer, and met with David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary of the UK, and talked about the fact that Ukraine, there'll be a follow-on summit perhaps. I mean, there's talk that Zelensky might be an invite at the last minute to the Alaska summit. But hopefully Trump holds Putin to something, because the problem is this is beneficial for Putin to be seen meeting Trump and being brought in from the cold. Unless there's some change in behavior from the Russians, it sort of is what Putin wants, right? Just continue talking and delay the thing and continue fighting Ukraine, right? Time's sort of on their side, given they've got superior forces, etc. And so, again, fascinating national relations, because now everyone's thinking what's going to happen at the summit and all of that.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I think I'll just say one thing about what you just said, that obviously Russia has a superior army. I mean, yes, I see elements of that, right? But I also think that there's been a lot of dissent in Russia as of recent. We don't see much of it, right? Because the media, it's really difficult for them to get out of the country and to tell everyone else what's going on. But I think that there has been a lot more discontent and a lot more, maybe even hatred or denial of what Putin is doing to the country. I think there's only so many people that can die in your community before you start to question, why are we even past war, right? So it's interesting to see what happens there. I mean, something that will likely not happen soon, but we would hope would happen, is that there'd be like a massive uprising in Russia, which would just end the whole thing from the inside without having to fight on the side of Ukraine. But that's incredibly unrealistic.
Don't hold your breath on that. I think, everything I've read about Russia,
I felt you roll Roll your eyes. I didn't even need to see
Putin
it.
is so entrenched and take either an assassination attempt or successful assassination attempt or, a complete embarrassment for Russia or, complete defeat in Ukraine or Putin to lose power. Again, a bit like Netanyahu, that's why he wants this war to continue as well. He wants a huge victory and he wants to take it up to NATO. So look, it'll be fascinating, whether something can be achieved. And Trump is already talking about exchanging of land. And then Zelensky said, we're not going to be giving land to invaders. And so he'll be in the bad books, etc., because, clearly there's got to be some compromise of land here. The big question is,
I don't know about that,
there
actually.
is the reality of it. That has to happen, but there has to be security guarantees. So this whole thing of the remaining...
There are no security guarantees that you can make with Russia.
Well, the remaining
There are
part
no
of Ukraine has to
security
become
guarantees
part
you
of
can make
NATO,
with
in
Russia.
my view. That's what has to happen. That has to be part of this negotiation, right? So Russia gets part of Ukraine, and the rest is part of NATO.
Ukraine should not have to give up
I
any more
agree.
land other than the land that
Logically,
that has already been taken from them. Massive regions have already been taken.
No, I agree.
From
No
them.
more than that. I mean, Zelensky was
The
making
land
out
that was
that none
annexed
of it
was already taken. No, but that was taken before. Already.
Crimea was,
Yeah,
but the
Crimea.
Donbass and all of that I'm talking about.
No, I know. That should not go to Russia. That's just giving them fuel to the fire. That's still a victory. That's still success in Putin's eyes. Every 10 years, he can launch another conflict so we can gain another territory of Ukraine.
If the rest of Ukraine becomes part of NATO, that's a win-win for both sides.
I don't think NATO really means much anymore.
Oh, it does.
The full backing of the US, what does it mean?
Well, it does have the backing of the US so long as the Europeans pay for all the weapons.
I know, but I can't see a scenario where the doorbell.
They're now doing.
If you hear that strange sound, that is our doorbell. Well, I just can't see a scenario in which Trump would still give them full backing if most of Ukraine remained in NATO. I think Trump would prefer a larger portion of Ukraine going to Putin, since Putin seems to be back in his good books again.
I don't know about that.
I don't think he's going to be defending Ukraine tooth and nail necessarily.
But he certainly wants a resolution, and so the world wants a resolution.
He wants a resolution because he wants to be seen as a Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Yes,
no other reason other than that. But he wants to defy all expectations, even as he's building concentration camps in his own country, the United States of America. He wants to be seen as a peace maker in other parts of the world. And another thing that's happened recently, which we'll just say just before we finish, is that between Armenia and Azerbaijan, he negotiated a peace deal, which is apparently years in the making, and the two leaders were incredibly... Because what did he agree to get this peace deal signed? What did he sign away from the Americans? What type of oil deal? What type of trade deal even?
If everybody's happy, that's okay. So long as both sides are happy, and if the US is happy, that's a win, right? The world diplomacy is a difficult place, so you've got to count a win as a win.
If the two guys who happen to be the leaders of a country are happy, this is what you're saying.
Leaders of both countries who are arguing with each other.
I know, it doesn't mean anything about the actual people within the country who are suffering.
All right,
at the expense
but you assume that they're representing the people. That's another can of worms.
That's crazy.
You don't assume that.
You directly assume that most leaders are representing their people?
Well, they have the right to, because they're the leader, right?
Whether hasn't even been
job they're doing, that's another matter. That's a topic for a full podcast.
That's just democracy itself. That's most countries in the world are not democratic anymore. Fun fact, there has been a massive trend towards authoritarianism, and democracies have been falling by the second across the world. So that's an interesting thing to say from you. But let's leave it at that. Maybe for another podcast.
And we will see you next week, and we should know a lot about what's happened by then.
Yeah,
have a great week, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye, guys.